The last thing I tasted was blood and cheap whiskey, a metallic tang mixed with the burn of grain alcohol. The cold of the porcelain bathtub was a final, indifferent embrace, seeping through my thin, torn dress. I remember the drip, drip, drip of the faucet, a relentless metronome counting down my final seconds. Then, the flash of camera bulbs through the frosted glass of the bathroom window. A final, cruel applause from a world that had already consumed me. My last thought wasn't of regret, or even fear, but of a quiet, burning injustice. And then, silence. I woke up to the smell of burnt toast and cheap, percolated coffee. The scent was so jarringly domestic, so fundamentally alive, that it felt like a physical blow. My eyes snapped open, not to the cracked, water-stained ceiling of a motel bathroom, but to a popcorn ceiling, yellowed with age, in a room I hadn't seen in a decade. Sunlight, thick with dust motes, streamed through a grime-streaked window. I sat up, the sheets rough against my skin, like cheap cotton, not the high thread count Egyptian silk I had grown accustomed to. My head didn't throb with a hangover. It was terrifyingly clear. I looked down at my hands. They were mine, but not. Slender and pale, yes, but the nails were short and unpainted, the knuckles slightly raw, the skin of a girl who scrubbed her own floors. The diamond ring, the one that had been a constant weight on my left hand for 3 years, was gone. In its place, only smooth, unadorned skin. I swung my legs out of bed. The floorboards were cold and splintery beneath my bare feet. A cracked, full-length mirror leaned against the opposite wall, and the reflection that stared back stole the air from my lungs. It was me. But it was the me from before Anya Petrova became a name whispered in casting rooms and screamed by paparazzi, before the awards, the betrayal, the fall. This was Alara, the nobody, 20 years old, face thin from a diet of instant noodles and anxiety, eyes wide with a desperate, hungry ambition that I now found nauseating. I reached up and touched a small, faded scar above my eyebrow, a souvenir from a childhood fall. In my other life, a team of Hollywood's best dermatologists had erased it completely. Here it was, a tiny map of a past I thought I had lost forever. I was back in this cramped, miserable apartment that smelled faintly of damp and despair. The year was 2024. I had died in 2034. I had been given 10 years back. A wave of dizziness washed over me. The sounds of the city outside a distant siren, the rumble of a truck, were both familiar and alien. This wasn't a dream. Dreams don't have the granular texture of reality, the feeling of a splinter in your heel, the specific sourness of day-old coffee left in a mug on the nightstand. In my first life, I fought my way out of this apartment with bloodied fingernails and a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I climbed the ladder, rung by treacherous rung, only to be pushed from the top. This time, I wouldn't climb. I wouldn't even touch the ladder. A strange calm settled over me, cold and heavy as a block of ice in my stomach. The burning ambition in the reflection's eyes was gone, replaced by something empty and ancient. I knew how the story ended. I knew who held the daggers and who wore the masks. And I knew that the greatest prize, the one they would all kill for, was actually the executioner's block. My only job was to stay out of the spotlight when the axe fell. A sharp, insistent knock rattled the thin wood of my apartment door. "Alara? You in there? You're going to be late for the workshop," the voice. It was like hearing a ghost. I closed my eyes, and for a second, I was back in the cold bathtub. The scent that accompanied that voice, a cloying cloud of black orchid perfume, was the same scent that had lingered in my dressing room the night the false story broke. Her perfume. The smell of my ruin. Coming. I called out. my voice raspy. I walked to the door, my bare feet silent on the worn linoleum. I pulled it open. Isla stood there, a vision of calculated perfection. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, not a single strand out of place. Her workout clothes were a matching set from a brand I knew cost more than my month's rent. Her face was a mask of concerned friendship, her lips pulled into a perfect pout. But her eyes, the same sharp, pale blue eyes, held a flicker of impatience, of condescension. She looked me up and down, taking in my rumpled t-shirt and sleep-mussed hair. "Rough night?" she asked, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. The heavy, sweet scent of her black orchid perfume filled my small apartment, clinging to the air like a disease. It was the scent of expensive lies. "Something like that," I said, my voice flat. In my past life, I would have been flustered, apologetic. I would have made excuses. Now, I just looked at her, really looked at her, and saw every cog and wheel turning behind those pretty blue eyes. I saw the envy, the insecurity, the ruthless ambition that she hid so well. "Well, hurry up," she said, tapping her foot. The sound of her expensive running shoes on the grimy hallway floor was a sharp, impatient rhythm. "The preliminary auditions for Elysian Dust are being announced today. Marcus Thorne himself might be there. This is it, Alara. This is the one. Ah, yes, Elysian Dust. The blockbuster sci-fi epic. The career-making role of a lifetime. The golden ticket that I had won in my past life, and the beginning of my end. And Marcus Thorne, the celebrated genius producer. The charming, silver-haired predator with a penchant for young, vulnerable actresses. The man whose sandalwood and leather cologne was the second scent that haunted my deathbed memories. I remembered the weight of his hand on my arm, his grip like a cold iron cuff. I remembered the way his voice, smooth as velvet, could turn sharp as broken glass in a heartbeat. I remembered the fear. Isla was still talking, her words a meaningless buzz. And they say the lead role, Lyra, is the most complex female character written this decade. Whoever gets it is set for life. An Oscar, for sure. She looked at me, a competitive glint in her eyes. "You're my biggest competition, you know. Everyone says so." It was a lie, of course. A piece of bait. She wanted me to rise to it, to engage in our little rivalry, to fight her for it. In our first run-through, we had clawed at each other for that role, and when I'd won, her friendship had curdled into a poison that eventually killed me. This time, I felt nothing. No spark of competition. No desire. Just the cold, detached interest of a scientist observing a specimen in a petri dish. "I don't think I'm going to audition," I said. I watched the words land. Isla's perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up. For a split second, the mask slipped. Raw, naked disbelief flashed across her face, followed by a flicker of suspicion. "What? Are you kidding me? Alara? This is everything we've worked for." "I'm tired, Isla," I said, leaning against the doorframe. I let my shoulders slump, my voice hold a note of weary resignation. I made myself look like the broken, hopeless girl she always wanted me to be. I don't think I have it in me, fighting for scraps. It's exhausting. Her suspicion melted away, replaced by a poorly concealed glee. She saw weakness. She saw her path clearing. Her smile was now genuinely pitying, and it was the most honest expression I had ever seen on her face. "Oh, honey," she said, reaching out to pat my arm. Her touch was light, dismissive. "Don't say that. You're just in a slump. But I understand. It's a tough business." She was already mentally rewriting the script. I wasn't her rival anymore. I was a tragic casualty of the industry, a stepping stone on her path to greatness. This was so much better for her narrative. Maybe I'll just focus on the workshop, I continued, my voice barely a whisper. Work on my craft, away from the pressure. That's a great idea, she said, her voice bright and encouraging. She was practically glowing. You do that. You take care of yourself. But I have to go. Don't want to miss the announcement. She squeezed my arm one last time. I'll see you later. She turned, her ponytail swinging like a pendulum, and practically bounced down the hallway. The cloud of her black orchid perfume was the only thing she left behind. I closed the door, the cheap lock clicking into place. I walked back to the window and watched as she got into her pristine white convertible, a gift from her wealthy parents. She pulled out her phone, probably texting our entire circle about my sudden, pathetic breakdown. Let her. I knew something she didn't. The role of Lyra in Elysian Dust came with strings. Those strings were attached to the powerful, untouchable Marcus Thorne. And in 2 years, a journalist named Catherine Wallace would publish an expose that would detonate a number Me Too firestorm right at the heart of his empire. Marcus would be ruined, his name becoming a synonym for abuse and corruption, and every single person closely associated with his final masterpiece, Elysian Dust, would be dragged down into the mud with him. The lead actress in particular would be scrutinized, her career incinerated by the proximity to his flameout. I was supposed to be that actress. I had been that actress. My association with him, twisted by Isla's whispers and doctored photos, was the fuel for the scandal that destroyed me, long before the real story about him ever broke. This time, Isla would be the one to take my place. She was so desperate for the spotlight, she wouldn't see the rot in the foundation holding it up. She would take the role, she would sign the contracts. She would stand by his side at the premieres, and she would become the face of his corruption. I didn't have to lift a finger. I didn't have to plant a seed of doubt or whisper a warning. All I had to do was say no. All I had to do was step back and let her insatiable hunger do the rest. She was so eager to take my place. She would walk right into my grave and call it a throne. I looked at my reflection in the grimy window. The girl staring back was no longer a victim. She was a ghost. And she was about to watch a horror movie she already knew the ending to. The burnt toast didn't smell so bad anymore. It smelled like the beginning of a very quiet, very satisfying revenge. The first step was erasure. Not of myself, but of the girl I used to be. Anya Petrova had been a comet bright, fiery, and destined to burn out. Alara, my new self, would be a stone, solid, grounded, and utterly unremarkable. I started at the acting workshop that afternoon. It was held in a dusty, cavernous space above a laundromat. The air was thick with the smell of damp brick, floor polish, and the collective sweat of desperate ambition. In my first life, I had thrived in this environment. I had lived for the thrill of a scene partner's reactive gasp, for the rare, approving nod from our notoriously difficult instructor, Julian. Today, I felt like an anthropologist observing a foreign tribe. Isla was holding court in the center of the room, reenacting her shock and disappointment over my decision not to audition. "It's just so sad," she was saying to a circle of rapt listeners, her voice pitched with dramatic sorrow. "She has so much talent, but I think the pressure is just getting to her. She's fragile." I walked past the group without a glance, heading to the corner of the room to stretch. I could feel their eyes on my back, could hear their whispers. I didn't care. Their opinions were the rustling of dead leaves. Julian, a man whose face was a roadmap of theatrical disappointments, clapped his hands together. The sound echoed off the high ceilings like a gunshot. "All right, you vultures, settle down. Let's work." "Ilara Leo, you're up," the scene from The Glass Menagerie. This was a test. Julian knew I excelled at this scene. He was trying to draw me out, to reignite the spark he saw in me. I walked to the center of the room. Leo, a sweet, gangly boy who always seemed terrified, gave me a nervous smile. The script felt alien in my hands, the words hollow. I knew them by heart, but the emotion behind them was a distant echo. I performed the scene. I said the lines correctly. I hit my marks, but I did it with the passionless precision of a machine. I gave Julian the technique, the structure, but I withheld the soul. I made Laura Wingfield not tragically fragile, but simply empty. It was a terrible artistic choice, but a brilliant strategic one. When the scene ended, the room was silent, not the awed silence I used to command, but an awkward, confused one. Julian stared at me, his brow furrowed. "Alara, what was that?" "It was the scene," I said, my voice empty of inflection. "No," he said, shaking his head. The disappointment in his eyes was a familiar sting, but it no longer had the power to wound me. "That was a recitation. The fire is gone. What happened to you?" I just shrugged. Isla watched from the sidelines, a small, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. This was perfect for her. Not only had I withdrawn from the race, I was now proving I never even deserved to be in it. My fall from grace was cementing her rise. Over the next 2 weeks, I systematically dismantled the life of the aspiring actress. I was deliberately late for workshops. I forgot my lines during scene studies. I turned down a meeting with a small-time agent Julian had arranged for me, claiming I had a dentist appointment. Each act of self-sabotage was a brick I laid in the foundation of my new, quiet life. And with each brick, Isla's star rose higher. She, of course, got the call back for Elysian Dust. Then a second one. Then a chemistry red. Her life became a whirlwind of hushed phone calls, expensive new headshots, and breathless gossip, which she was all too happy to share. They had me read, with Jackson Vance. She told me one evening, cornering me as I was leaving the workshop. She smelled of black orchid and victory. Can you believe it? And Marcus Thorne was in the room. He never comes to chemistry reads. Her eyes were shining with a feverish light. He said I had a luminous quality. "That's nice," I said, pulling my worn coat tighter around myself. The air outside was getting colder, carrying the scent of rain and car exhaust. Her smile faltered for a second. My utter lack of jealousy, of even interest, was unnerving to her. She needed my envy to properly savor her success. "You don't get it, do you?" she said. A new, sharper edge to her voice. "This is Marcus Thorne. He made Helena Ray. He discovered Leo Chen. If he likes you, you're not just a star. You're a galaxy. I hope you get it," I said. And I meant it. I truly, deeply, from the bottom of my reborn heart, hoped she would get it. The trap was laid. The bait was shimmering. All she had to do was bite down, and a week later, she did. I found out when my phone buzzed with a notification from a trade publication. Isla Vance cast, as led in Marcus Thorne's highly anticipated Elysian Dust. The article featured a glossy photo of her, smiling radiantly, standing beside a dapper, smiling Marcus Thorne. He had his hand on the small of her back. The sight of it sent a jolt of ice through my veins, a muscle memory of revulsion. His signature sandalwood and leather cologne seemed to waft from the phone's screen. Later that night, the party happened. Isla threw a massive "I got the part" celebration at a chic, overpriced bar downtown. I knew about it because I was serving the drinks. I had quit the acting workshops 2 days earlier and picked up a catering job. The pay was terrible, but it was honest. The weight of a heavy tray of champagne glasses was more real than any applause. The work was anonymous, and anonymity was my new shield. The bar was a cacophony of noise and smells. The thumping bass of the music vibrated through the floor, a synthetic heartbeat. The air was a thick cocktail of expensive perfumes, spilled gin, and the faint, acrid smell of desperation that clings to the edges of Hollywood parties. I moved through the crowd, my face a neutral mask, my black uniform rendering me invisible. I saw Isla holding court, naturally. She was wearing a dress that was more glitter than fabric, a glass of champagne in her hand. She was laughing, a loud, theatrical sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was surrounded by the same people who had, weeks ago, been my friends. Now they orbited her like moons around a new, brighter planet. I just knew it. One of them gushed. "The moment I saw you," I said, "that girl is a star." And Alara, another one said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Did you hear? She quit the workshop. Someone saw her picking up a shift at the Griddle Cafe. Can you imagine? From most promising to flipping pancakes. Tragic." Isla took a delicate sip of her champagne. "Some people just don't have the stomach for it," she said, her voice laced with a condescending pity that was far more insulting than outright malice. "The industry chews you up and spits you out if you're not strong enough." I set a fresh tray of canapés on a nearby table, my movements smooth and unnoticed. Strong enough. That was funny. She had no idea what strength was. She thought it was the ability to smile for the cameras and stab your friends in the back. She didn't know that real strength was the ability to see the abyss and choose to walk away. Real strength was choosing to flip pancakes when you knew the alternative was being served up on a platter. Our eyes met across the crowded room. She didn't recognize me at first. My hair was pulled back in a severe bun. My face was bare of makeup. My body was hidden under the shapeless black uniform. Then, a flicker of recognition. Her smile widened. It was a cruel, triumphant thing. This was the ultimate victory for her. Not just winning the part, but seeing me here, like this, her fallen rival, serving her tiny, overpriced sausages on a stick. She beckoned me over with a flick of her fingers, the massive, gaudy cocktail ring she wore catching the light. I picked up my tray of empty glasses and walked towards her, my face impassive. The closer I got, the stronger her black orchid perfume became, a suffocating wave of sweetness. "Alara," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone in her circle to hear. "I almost didn't recognize you. Love the uniform? It's very minimalist." The circle of sycophants giggled. "Can I get you something, miss?" I asked, my voice polite, professional, utterly devoid of history. Her eyes narrowed. She wanted a reaction. She wanted tears, or anger, or at the very least a resentful glare. I gave her nothing. I was a blank wall she could throw her insults against, and they would just slide off. "Actually, yes," she said, a new plan forming in her mind. She handed me her half-empty champagne flute. "This one's gone warm. Get me a fresh one. And make it quick. We're about to do toasts." "Of course," I said. I took the glass. As I turned, I saw him. Marcus Thorne had just arrived. He moved through the party like a shark, people parting for him instinctively. He wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than my car, and his silver hair was perfectly coiffed. As he drew near Isla, I caught the scent I remembered with a sickening lurch of my stomach. Rich sandalwood, expensive leather, and something else, something metallic and cold, just beneath the surface. It was the smell of power. He kissed Isla on the cheek, his hand once again finding the small of her back, proprietary and firm. "There's my star," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the party chatter. Isla preened under his attention. "Marcus, you came. I wouldn't miss it," he said, his eyes scanning the room before landing for a brief, chilling moment on me. He didn't recognize me, of course. I was just part of the furniture. But for a second, I felt that old, familiar fear, the feeling of a fly being noticed by a spider. I retreated to the bar, my hands steady but my heart hammering against my ribs. PTSD flashback. quick and brutal. The click of his office door locking, the scent of sandalwood filling the air, thick and suffocating. His voice whispering, "Don't be difficult, Anya." I gripped the edge of the bar, the cold, wet metal steadying me. I took a deep breath, the smell of lime and gin cutting through the phantom scent of sandalwood. That was then. That was a different girl, a different life. I was not Anya. I was Alara. And Alara was just a waitress. I got the fresh glass of champagne and carried it back. I navigated the crowd and stood beside Isla, waiting for a pause in her conversation with Marcus. The press tour is going to be grueling. But I know you can handle it, Marcus was saying. We'll need you in top form. No distractions. His eyes flickered with a warning that Isla, in her giddy excitement, completely missed. I was born for this, she breathed, staring at him with undisguised adoration. I held out the champagne flute. Your drink, miss. Isla took it without looking at me, her attention fully on Marcus. She was hooked. She was in the cage. The door was locked, and the key had been thrown away, and she was smiling, thinking it was a throne. It was the most pathetic, tragic thing I had ever seen. I turned and walked away, melting back into the anonymous shadows of the party, the sound of their laughter fading behind me. The bury had been set. Now, all I had to do was wait for it to snap shut. While Isla was living her new glittering life, I was building mine from scratch, with dirt and calluses. I quit the catering job Too Many Ghosts and found work at a small, family-owned plant nursery on the quiet, forgotten edge of the city. My new life smelled of damp earth, crushed lavender, and the sharp green scent of tomato leaves. It was the antithesis of Hollywood. It was real. My apartment, the same one that had once felt like a prison of failure, slowly transformed. I filled it with plants, gangly ferns, stubborn succulents, a ridiculously optimistic lemon tree. I painted the yellowed walls a soft, calming gray. I bought a second-hand armchair and a warm woolen blanket. It wasn't a palace, but it was a sanctuary. It was mine. The sounds of my life were no longer the frantic ringing of an agent's call or the hollow echo of fake applause. They were the gentle hiss of a kettle, the rustle of leaves in the breeze from my open window, the quiet scratch of my pencil in a sketchbook. I had started drawing again, something I hadn't done since before the ambition took root. My boss at the nursery was a woman named Rosa, whose hands were permanently stained with soil and whose laughter was as loud and unrestrained as her floral print aprons. She had kind, crinkled eyes and never once asked about my past. She only cared if I remembered to water the hydrangeas. I made a friend, a genuine one. His name was Ben, a local artist who bought his clay from the shop next door and always stopped by to talk about the miserable state of his basil plant. He had paint under his fingernails and a smile that was crooked and real. Our conversations were about potting soil and the best place to get coffee, not about box office numbers or who was sleeping with whom to get a part. One rainy afternoon, Ben and I were huddled in the nursery's small office, sharing a thermos of Rosa's ridiculously strong, cinnamon-spiked coffee. The sound of the rain drumming on the corrugated plastic roof was a soothing, steady rhythm. The air smelled of wet pavement and petrichor. "You seem content," Ben said, watching me carefully sketch the intricate veins of a calathea leaf. "Like, really content. It's weird to see in this city." I looked up from my sketchbook, a small smile touching my lips. "I like it here. It's quiet." "Quiet is good," he agreed, taking a sip of his coffee. The steam fogged up his glasses. "The rest of the city is so loud, everyone's shouting about how important they are." He had no idea. Meanwhile, Isla's world was nothing but shouting. Her face was everywhere. Magazine covers, talk shows, billboards that loomed over the freeways like titans. Isla Vance, Hollywood's newest it girl, the star of Elysian Dust Shines. The publicity machine was in full force, and Isla was its glowing, perfect product. They dressed her in designer gowns, wrote her charming anecdotes for late-night appearances, and paired her with handsome co-stars for carefully orchestrated candids. I would see her on the television screen in the corner of a diner, or on the cover of a magazine at the grocery checkout. Her hair was blonder, her teeth were whiter, her smile was wider and more practiced. The black orchid perfume practically wafted off the glossy pages, but when I looked closely at her eyes, I could see the first hairline cracks in the facade. There was a brittle, high-strung energy about her, a tension in her jaw that even the best airbrushing couldn't completely erase. The life she had so desperately craved was beginning to take its toll. The first public sign that something was wrong was subtle. A blind item in a gossip column, so vague it was almost meaningless, but I knew exactly what it was referring to. What notoriously difficult to work with genius's producer has his new starlet on a virtual leash. Sources on set say the ingenue isn't allowed to take calls on her own phone and has a handler from the producer's team with her at all times. Sounds less like a star-making vehicle and more like a gilded cage. I read it on my phone during my lunch break, sitting on an upturned bucket behind the nursery, the sun warm on my face. A gilded cage. The columnist had no idea how accurate that was. 2 weeks later, the first real tremor hit. A well-respected industry blog published a piece titled "The Troubled Production of Elysian Dust." It detailed budget overruns, a revolving door of crew members citing a toxic work environment, and anonymous quotes about Marcus Thorne's tyrannical directing style. Isla was mentioned only briefly, praised for her unwavering professionalism under difficult circumstances. It was a carefully worded piece, but the implication was there. The dream project was a nightmare. I imagined Isla reading it, her heart pounding. She would have called Marcus in a panic, and he would have smoothed it over with his velvet voice, telling her it was all lies, that people were just jealous of their masterpiece. And she would have believed him. She had to. She had staked her entire life on him being her savior. The real escalation came a month after that. It was late, and I was watering the orchids in the humid greenhouse, the air thick and sweet with the scent of blossoms. My phone buzzed. It was a news alert from a major publication. Journalist Catherine Wallace announces upcoming investigative piece on Hollywood's open secret. My blood ran cold. Catherine Wallace, the same journalist, but she was early. In my timeline, her story hadn't broken for another year. Something had accelerated the process. My refusal to take the role. My complete disappearance from the scene. Had my absence created a vacuum that pulled the future forward? The story didn't name names, but it didn't have to. It spoke of a powerful producer, a pattern of abuse going back decades, and a trail of broken women who were finally ready to speak. The internet exploded with speculation, and Marcus Thorne's name was at the top of every list. I knew Isla would be in freefall. Her perfect, glittering world was suddenly tilting on its axis. The phone calls, the whispers, the nervous glances from her publicity team. It would be a slow-motion nightmare. I saw her a week later. It was a coincidence, a 1 in a million chance in a city of millions. I was at a 2-4-hour pharmacy buying bandages for a cut I'd gotten from a rose bush. The air inside was sterile, smelling of disinfectant and cheap plastic. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting a pale, unflattering light on everything. And there she was, in the skincare aisle. If I hadn't known it was her, I might have missed her. She wore a baseball cap pulled down low and sunglasses, despite it being nearly midnight. Her posture was hunched. Her shoulders curved inward, as if trying to make herself smaller. The designer tracksuit she wore was stained with something on the sleeve. She was holding a box of the most expensive under-eye concealer the pharmacy sold, her knuckles white as she gripped it. I walked past her aisle to get to the checkout. She looked up at the sound of my footsteps, her eyes wide and startled, like a cornered animal. It was then that she saw me. Her mouth fell open slightly. She took in my simple jeans, my comfortable hoodie, the smear of dirt on my cheek I had missed when washing up. For a long moment, we just stared at each other under the humming, merciless lights of the pharmacy. She looked exhausted. The tension I'd seen in photos had carved fine lines around her mouth. Her skin was sallow beneath the remnants of her television-ready makeup. "Alara," she breathed. Her voice, a raw whisper. "Isla," I said, my voice even. She took a half step forward, a desperate, frantic energy coming off her in waves. The faint scent of black orchid was still there, but it was soured, mixed with something like stale sweat and fear. "What are you doing here?" "Buying bandages," I said, holding up the small box. It was the wrong answer. The simplicity, the sheer banality of it, was like a slap in the face. She wanted drama. She wanted a confrontation, a confession, something to lash out at. "You look," she started, her eyes raking over me, searching for any sign of regret, of misery. She found none. The happy. She said the word like it was an accusation, an obscenity. "I am," I said quietly. And the truth of that simple statement settled in the space between us, solid and undeniable. It was the cruelest thing I could have possibly said to her. Her face twisted, the mask of the movie star crumbling to reveal the terrified, envious girl underneath. "How can you be happy?" she hissed, her voice cracking. "Look at you. You're a nobody. You're working with dirt. I'm a star. I have everything. Do you?" I asked. It was a genuine question. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and angry. The things they're saying about Marcus. They're lies. He's a genius. He's my mentor. They're just trying to tear us down because they're jealous. She was reciting a script, one she had probably repeated to herself in the mirror 1,000 times. I didn't say anything. I just looked at her. I didn't have to tell her the truth. The truth was bearing down on her like a freight train, and she could already feel the tracks trembling. "You ran away," she whispered, a horrible new thought dawning in her eyes. The first flicker of true understanding. "You quit. You gave up. You're a coward." "No," I said, my voice still quiet, still calm. "I just chose a different life." I paid for my bandages and walked out, leaving her standing alone in the sterile, brightly lit aisle. I didn't look back. As the automatic doors slid shut behind me, I knew that the next time I saw her, the woman she was tonight would be gone forever, replaced by the wreckage she was destined to become. The trap was no longer just set. Its metal jaws were beginning to close. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It was a series of rapid, brutal detonations. 1 week after my encounter with Isla at the pharmacy, Catherine Wallace's article dropped. It was a masterpiece of investigative journalism. Cold, factual, devastating. The Hollywood Reporter, "The king is dead. Marcus Thorne accused of decades of sexual abuse by 6 women." I read the headline on my phone, sitting in Ben's dusty, sun-drenched art studio. The air smelled of turpentine and clay. The headline was stark. The story was worse. It was a harrowing, detailed account of Thorne's predatory behavior, his methods, his threats, the network of enablers who had protected him. His name was no longer a symbol of prestige. Overnight, it became a brand of poison. The fallout was immediate. The studio, in a desperate act of damage control, shelved Elysian Dust indefinitely. The words hit the trades like a death sentence. Indefinitely. Millions of dollars. Years of work. All of it vaporized in a single press release. Then came the statements. Thorne's agency dropped him. The Academy announced it was reviewing his membership. Actors who had once sung his praises, were now racing to condemn him, to distance themselves from his toxic legacy. Every statement was a nail in his coffin. And Isla? Isla was caught in the blast radius. She was the face of his final, now infamous project. She was his last protege. Fair or not, her name was now inextricably linked with his. She went from being the industry's brightest new star to a piece of collateral damage. The paparazzi, who had once adored her, turned on her like a pack of wolves. They hunted her. They camped outside her apartment. They followed her car. And the photos they took were merciless. The Isla on the magazine covers was gone. In her place was a haunted-looking woman with wild, unkempt hair and dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. The designer clothes were replaced by wrinkled sweats. Her hands trembled constantly, whether she was holding a phone to her ear or fumbling for her car keys. The transformation was brutal, and it was public. She wasn't just falling from grace. She was being publicly dismantled, piece by agonizing piece. She tried to fight back. She released a statement through a newly hired publicist. "I am shocked and heartbroken by these allegations against Mr. Thorne," it read. "The man I knew was a brilliant artist and a supportive mentor. I have never personally experienced or witnessed any of the behavior described." It was the worst possible thing she could have said. The public didn't see a victim. They saw an enabler, a liar. The hashtag number Believe Women trended alongside number Isla knew. Her career wasn't just stalled. It was over. The brand she had built was now radioactive. I watched it all from the quiet sanctuary of my new life. I would see her face on the news while I was eating dinner. I would hear her name on the radio as I drove to work. Each new development was a distant storm that couldn't touch me. I felt no joy, no triumph, just a profound, chilling sense of inevitability. This was always how her story was going to end. The only thing that had changed was that it was no longer my story. The moment I knew she understood finally came on a Tuesday. It was raining. A relentless gray drizzle that turned the city into a watercolor of blurred lights and slick pavement. I was at the nursery, consolidating bags of potting soil in the loading bay, the scent of damp earth heavy in the air. A taxi pulled up, splashing through a puddle. The back door opened, and she got out. She wasn't wearing a disguise this time. Her face was pale and gaunt, her makeup smeared by the rain. Her once perfect blonde hair was plastered to her scalp. She wore a thin, expensive-looking coat that was already soaked through, offering no protection from the cold. She looked fragile, like a porcelain doll that had been cracked and hastily glued back together. She walked towards me, her steps unsteady on the wet concrete. She stopped a few feet away, rain dripping from her chin. The air between us was cold. Her signature scent was gone. Washed away by the rain and her despair, she just smelled of wet wool and misery. "You knew," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A final, horrifying piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Her voice was a hoarse whisper, almost lost in the sound of the rain. I didn't answer. I just looked at her, my expression unreadable. I kept my hands busy, tying off another bag of soil. The rough texture of the plastic was a grounding sensation. "You knew what he was," she continued, her voice gaining a hysterical edge. "That role. You didn't just turn it down. You ran from it. You knew what would happen to whoever took it. The signs were there for anyone to see." I said calmly, my voice even. "You just didn't want to look." "The signs?" she shrieked, a wild, broken laugh escaping her lips. "What signs? The industry adoration? The awards? The billion-dollar box office numbers? Those were the only signs I saw." "You saw what you wanted to see, Isla," I said, finally stopping my work and turning to face her fully. You saw a shortcut. You were so focused on the prize, you never bothered to check if it was poisoned. The truth of the statement hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back a step, her hand flying to her mouth. The blood drained from her face, leaving it a waxy, translucent white. This was it. The moment of absolute clarity. The moment she realized this wasn't bad luck. This wasn't a tragic twist of fate. This was a consequence. "You let me," she whispered, her eyes wide, with a dawning horror that was almost fascinating to watch. "You stood by, and you let me walk right into it. You could have warned me. You could have said something. Would you have listened?" I asked, my voice laced with a cold, dry irony. "If I had told you, 'Don't take the role of a lifetime, Isla. The famous producer is a monster,' what would you have done? You would have laughed in my face. You would have told everyone I was crazy, that I was just jealous and trying to sabotage you. You would have run even faster towards him, just to prove me wrong." Her silence was my answer. We both knew it was true. Her ambition and her envy were a blinding force. Any warning from me would have been seen as an attack. "So you just watched," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You watched me destroy my life. I watched you make your choices," I corrected her gently. "They were your choices, Isla, not mine. I wasn't your rival. I wasn't your friend. I was just the girl who went before you. You just happened to be standing close enough to take the fall that was meant for me." I turned my back on her then and went back to my work. The sound of her ragged, sobbing breaths was swallowed by the steady drumming of the rain on the roof. I heard the taxi door slam, and the sound of the engine fading into the distance. I did not look up. I just continued my work. My hands in the dirt, in the quiet, in the rain. The fire was over, and all that was left was the smoke and the ashes. The final confrontation happened 2 months later. The world had moved on. Marcus Thorne was a pariah, buried in lawsuits and facing criminal charges. Isla's name had faded from the headlines, replaced by new scandals, new starlets. She was old news, a ghost of a career that had barely begun. I received a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at the observatory. Sunset. I need to talk to you." There was no signature, but I knew who it was from. The Griffith Observatory. It was where we had gone to celebrate after getting accepted into the acting conservatory years ago, back when we were still naive enough to believe we were friends. It was a sentimental, manipulative choice of location. I went. Not for her, but for me. I needed to close the book. The air at the top of the hill was crisp and clear. The setting sun painted the sky in lurid shades of orange and purple, a ridiculously cinematic backdrop for our final scene. The sprawling city of Los Angeles glittered below, a sea of 1,000,000 tiny lights, each one a story, a dream. From up here, it was all so beautiful, the ugliness hidden by the distance. She was waiting for me on one of the outer balconies, leaning against the cold stone balustrade. She was different again. The wild, hunted look was gone, replaced by a strange, unnerving calm. She had lost weight. Her face was sharper, older. She was wearing a simple, elegant black dress, her hair pulled back neatly. She looked like she was attending her own funeral. She didn't turn as I approached. She just kept staring out at the city lights. "I used to think that was the most beautiful sight in the world," she said, her voice soft and empty. "All that promise, all that light, now it just looks like a graveyard." I stood beside her, not speaking. I wasn't going to offer empty platitudes. "I've lost everything," she continued in that same dead monotone. "My agent won't return my calls. My publicist dropped me. My parents, they look at me with this pity. It's worse than the anger. The money from the movie is gone, all spent on lawyers." I'm selling the condo. She finally turned to look at me. Her eyes were hollowed out, dark pools of nothing. All because of you. No, Isla, I said, my voice firm, but not unkind. Not because of me. Because of you. I was ambitious. She spat, a flicker of the old fire returning. I was driven. Is that a crime? In this city, it's a requirement. You were the same way. Don't you dare stand there and pretend you were some innocent little flower. I was, I agreed, and I paid the price for it. The only difference between you and me is that I got a chance to do it over. I learned my lesson. And what lesson was that? She sneered. To give up? To go hide in a flower shop and feel sorry for yourself? No, I said, turning to look out at the city. The lesson was that some games are rigged. The only way to win is not to play. You saw a throne, Isla. All I saw was a chair with an axe dangling over it. You were so desperate to sit in it. You never even bothered to look up. She was silent for a long time, the cool evening wind whipping a few strands of hair across her face. You could have saved me, she whispered, the accusation weak now. Pathetic. If you were ever my friend, even for a second, you would have saved me. This was the moment. The final turn of the screw. I could have let her have this last, pathetic delusion. I could have walked away and let her believe that she was a victim of my cruelty, but that wouldn't have been the truth, and she needed to hear the truth. I turned to face her, my gaze unflinching, my voice dropping to a low, calm, precise whisper. The final, cold truth. I was never your friend, Isla, and you were never mine. We were competitors, and in our first life, you won. You and Marcus worked together to create a scandal that destroyed my career and drove me to my death in a cheap motel bathtub. You built your success on my bones. I watched her face as the words registered. Confusion, denial, and then a flicker of something else. A buried memory, the faintest ghost of a past sin. It didn't matter. I wasn't here for her to remember. I was here to state a fact. When I came back, I didn't want revenge, I continued, my voice as cold and clear as the night air. I just wanted peace. The fact that your own ambition led you to the same man, the same fate that you had planned for me. That's not revenge. That's poetry. That's karma. I didn't do anything to you, Isla. I just failed to save you from yourself. I let the words hang in the air between us. This was the truth that would shatter her final illusion. The illusion that she was the victim. She was the architect of her own destruction in this life and the last. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. The carefully constructed calm she had worn was gone, shattered into a million pieces. In her eyes, I saw the final, horrifying understanding. She wasn't just ruined. She was damned. I held her gaze for one last moment. I felt no pity. I felt no satisfaction. I felt nothing. The book was closed. Goodbye, Isla, I said, and I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I walked past the tourists taking photos, past the giant telescopes pointed at the unblinking stars. I walked down the long, winding hill, back towards my small, quiet life. The city lights glittered below me, no longer a graveyard, no longer a promise. They were just lights. My life now is measured in sunrises and the turning of seasons. I have dirt under my nails and the scent of lavender on my clothes. I have Ben, who brings me coffee in the morning and makes me laugh. I have my sketchbook, filled with the delicate, honest beauty of leaves and flowers. It's a small life, a simple life, and it is infinitely more precious than anything I lost. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. They're wrong. The best revenge isn't a dish at all. It's forgetting to set the table in the first place. and instead going outside to plant a garden.